Pierre Tyler de Chardin and other people as well before have talked about the Janus-based reality of our existence as an individuated unit of consciousness, but also as a multiplicity, because we're much more than that. We're a collection of organisms. We're a common cell, a community. Even in our body, we think we're separate, but we're not at all. We're intimately connected with the environment around us, with the universe, and with each other. People think that nobody knows, what goes on in our head or a body, but that's not true. That's not true at all. And in many ways, research and more recent research where people have started to investigate the luminous field, we know that minds interact, telepathy and all sorts of things. I know that from my experience. And I knew that as a child. The dead are still with us. Those fields haven't disappeared, that people are still there.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernie Beitman, MD, psychiatrist, and all that. And I'm very interested in a lot of different things, but one of them is helping to bring to your awareness the collective human organism, that each of us is a cell. Each of us is an individual cell in a giant thing that's now stomping all over nature and ruining our biosphere. And a lot of people don't want to pay attention to that, and thinking of ourselves not just as we're all in this together, but as in this together as part of something that is collective, that we are all a cell in different parts of this organism, if we want to be. If we want to recognize that. And agency is really, really important in your involvement with the collective human organism. And one very interesting model of the collective human organism are slime molds. Slime molds are single cell organisms that can form complex network-like structures to solve problems. They're all by themselves, eating on their environment as single cells, but then they eat up too much is what we're doing to our environment. And then they say, uh-oh, somehow they send signals to each other chemically and electromagnetically to each other and say, we got to get together. I'm putting my human on it. And they create a slime mold, an organism that is made up of each of the single cells. And these single cells, again, without having any nervous system, become a collective that whose behavior emerges from simple rules followed by the individual cells, offering insights to how complexity arises in nature and how we can organize ourselves. Because the slime mold, when it becomes one organism with all the different cells in it, it moves over to where there's more food for it, and then it goes back into single cells until the food in that area is used up. Well, I just find that an intriguing metaphor for the collective human organism, and our guest today is, among other things, has studied the slime mold. She is Elizabeth Davies and has published research in bioelectromagnetic. We are ourselves bioelectromagnetic entities. And that's part of the new future for the collective human organism, to recognize that we are bioelectromagnetic organisms who can organize. And she has studied the effect of pulsed magnetic fields on living cells. And she used the slime mold as a model system for human cellular activity. She monitored the dynamics of cell signaling during exposure to applied electromagnetic fields as used in orthopedics and physiotherapy. Her recent published research has involved monitoring correlations between dynamics in the geomagnetic field and oxygen production in pond plants. Correlations between geomagnetic field dynamics and heart rate variability. So the magnetic fields that we are in, the geomagnetic fields, influences the heart rate variability, the rate at which our heart rate changes, as well as changes in EEG brainwave dynamics during mediumship. So studies mediumship. So how do their brainwaves change? She's compared with just imagination. She's written poetry since childhood and illustrated and printed her own books. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth Davies.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. I mean, this electromagnetic field, the bioelectromagnetic field, is so important for the future understanding of humanity. But before we get to that, tell us one of your coincidence stories.
Right, Bernie. Well, the one I chose is particularly significant because it's what directed me, I suppose, in this particular research area in bioelectromagnetics. I mean, I'd always wanted to get there, but this, I was just going to do electronic engineering to get me there, and then I ended up in the biological sciences thing. But so it started with I had done an OND in technology. I was in my 20s. And no, I was in my early 30s at the time, and I'd done an OND in technology, which is an engineering course. And I brought into it, I'd been studying as a final year project, the effect of magnetic fields on a chemical reaction. In fact, it was in the yeasts, and it was carbon dioxide production. And you know, that was my interest, was in investigating fields, and that was my interest in science. I wasn't quite sure how to get there. So anyway, I was applying and thinking of applying to Sussex University to do electronic engineering, and I was due the next day to an open day there. And but the night before, I woke up after this amazing dream. I woke up laughing, and in the dream, I was in a room with young people, and the room was full of clocks. And as I sat with them, the clocks started behaving erratically. All the hands were going in different directions. It was quite crazy. They were all different clocks, and we were all laughing. It was quite chaotic. The hands were going backwards, forwards, round, and it was just quite crazy. And it was almost as if the minds were making it happen. I didn't quite know how, but I woke up out of this dream suddenly, laughing. I was laughing my head off. And then, you know, I put the dream aside and went for my open day. And I went and listened to the introductory lecture in the engineering department. And after that, I was wandering around the campus, and I felt drawn to go to the biological sciences building, where they were about to have, the dean was giving a lecture, you know, on what courses they offered. And I was quite attracted to the idea of neurobiology. So, well, very attracted really. But anyway, I was near the front of the auditorium there, and the dean was started talking and everything. And suddenly he responded to somebody at the back. I think these were all young people. I was basically a mature student. These were all school leavers, you know, in their late teens, and I was in my 30s then. And he I said, yes, what is it? You want to ask a question? And this young lady spoke up and said, please, sir, do you realise the second hand of the clock, which was at the back, is going backwards? And the dean looked up and he looked at it, and everybody turned round, and I turned round, and sure enough, the clock said exactly the right time, but the second hand was going backwards. And the dean said, that's strange. I've never seen that before. Not sure how that happened. And there was a sort of titter and gasps of amazement, and then everybody was quiet. But suddenly I got a shock of realization, and I remembered my dream from the night before. Now, I didn't say anything, but it was really like a lightning shock. And I realized it was like my dream had penetrated into physical reality. How did that happen? That the second hand, the clock was showing the right time, but the second hand was going backwards. Electric clock. How did that happen? And it was so coincidental or synchronistic, you might say. I began to, well, anyway, because of that dream, I pursued the idea of biology, of going into biology and working my way to understand the field through which healing could take place, because I'd been involved in spiritual healing, basically. And since childhood, I'd felt that capacity. But I wanted to know how it worked, these miracles, and what field it was through which healing could take place. And that was really, and it was like a Masonic handshake when I met people, to actually even confess that that was my motivation in studying bioelectromagnetics, really, that it was that numinous field that I was interested in. But I knew that there were fields around the body as well. So it was really that synchronicity of that bolt of lightning effect that my dream mind somehow wasn't separate from the physical world. And it wasn't the first time that had happened, but this was just particularly significant at that time, because I knew that I was going in, I knew where I had to go, and I didn't know how to get there. And it was almost like it was pointing me in that direction of the biological sciences. So I ended up anyway in the biology department of the pharmaceutical sciences block in the neighbouring university. And that's where I started doing my degree, first of all, and then my PhD. And it was...
Well, let's.
Okay, we'll get there.
For you in the audience, Elizabeth has encouraged me to be able to suggest
Shut
that.
me up.
Well, when she diverges a little bit, I get
Yeah, I
to
know, I know.
undiverge her.
Thank you, Bernie.
The name of my next book coming out in May is Life-Changing Synchronicities. And this is a wonderful example of a life-changing synchronicity of yours, where you had a dream and then the second hand goes backwards after your dream is about the clock hands doing all kinds of weird things. Now, you made a leap that I didn't expect, that your dream affected the clock in the room.
Indeed. I've had other experiences since more recently, and I've been part of a research project that's being run by Eminent in King's University in Canada, to do with post-mortem entities interacting with mobile phones. But I've also had interaction with the computer like that. So it's that interaction of consciousness with electronics is something that, you see, my doubting mind, the scientific side of me, has been given these experiences almost by the universe, or by the field, if you like. But as an individual, with my background in the normal paradigm, scientific paradigm that operates, and the normal education system I've been in, doubts. And I question these things. Is it real? And then I'm given these experiences, but it doesn't stop. I still question, and I still want to know why and how. But
It doesn't, you don't stop questioning, which is what we need to do, because we really don't know that much, and there's a lot we don't know, so we got to keep doing it. But you could have been called precognition, that you could anticipate it. And
yes,
what you did was attribute the clock, the second hand in the classroom going backwards, to the dream you had. But then you have to ask, where did the dream come from? And then you get to the question of retrocognition, the idea that you that maybe there was some change in the way time was working, so that you could know the clock was going to go that way, and then you could know you could, and that would influence your dream. So the clock happened before your dream. You could do that. There's many ways to think about it, but I like that you're thinking about it in terms of fields, and that somehow the idea of time being messed up somehow and not the linear in the way we think about it, like going
Yeah,
backwards
yeah,
or being
yeah, yeah,
chaotic. That seems to be a symbolic element in
yeah,
this
yeah,
that also is part of the way you might anticipate analyzing it.
yeah, yes. Well, can I tell you this? The starting point of my real interest in the possibility of research was back as a teenager when in the school library I came across a book called An Experiment with Time by, was it J.W. Dunn, W.H. Dunn. He was an engineer at the beginning of the 20th century, but he was also an amateur psychologist and kept records of his dreams. And he realized over a period of time that he not only dreamt about things that had happened or were current in his life, but things that happened in the future precognitively. That sometimes they are little things, minor things, but sometimes big things. But the interesting thing in the book was, don't believe me what I say, but you can test it for yourself. You can have
Good.
your own laboratory, you can be your own scientist. All you need is a pillow, a notebook, a pencil, and a torch, and a technique for recalling your dreams, because most people forget their dreams, which he gave in the book. Now, to me, this was wonderful. He gave a technique for investigating the numinous world. And I used it. And very soon, I found that he was correct. I started dreaming whole things before they happened, whole letters before they arrived. I had a friend who was living abroad at the time, and occasionally I would get an airmail letter from him. And one night, soon after this happened, I dreamt I was walking up this mountain with him, beautiful flowers everywhere. He was an artist, but he didn't usually write in words. It was drawings he did, but this time he was telling me about the flowers and the colors and everything. In the dream, I was walking with him. The next day, on my doorstep, again, this could be precognitive. It could be, it couldn't, I don't think it could have been telepathic because of the time it took for, I don't know quite what it
That that distinction can get really strange, and it
Yes,
doesn't really explain anything.
no,
It suggests that there's a field in which information gets exchanged,
that's
or a-
information field.
an
Yeah,
information field, and then
outside time.
and time becomes, as your dream suggests, that you can't really
Yeah,
understand time because it can go backwards, forwards, and be
time.
twisted as well.
Yeah,
So
time.
anyway,
Yeah,
we'll call it precognitive. It could be that clairvoyant too. You could be looking at his letter while he's writing it, which is
absolutely.
you can use those terms, but it's a psi phenomenon. And what we need to do is get some idea about how psi phenomena take place. And bioelectric magnetism is a good clue as part of a general field in which this stuff takes place.
Mhm.
So that you have had what we'll call precognitive dreams,
Yeah,
where you
yeah,
can dream the whole letter. And let's say that you've had lots of those experiences, and they inform you by you're recognizing that reality isn't what we are been told it's been, and that's part of your curiosity in this. So I'd like to be able to weave this in as much as possible, the field bioelectromagnetics, with your research in slime molds, and get to the collective human organism metaphor that the slime mold partially represents.
yeah, yeah. So basically, I found myself with my interest in going into that discovery of what this field was, drawn through I studied very elementary. I had to go back. I was very much on the art side before, so I had to do my very elementary science thing. And one of the physics lecturer there had seen a program on television in which the Department of Medical Electronics at St Bartholomew's Hospital, the professor there, the head of the department, they were doing research into fields around living things, demonstration. And he knew that I was interested in that. And I'd read as a teenager that Harold Saxton Burr, the fields that Blueprint to Immortality, the fields that underpin life. So I was aware of the possibility of investigating fields around the body, with voltmeters and various apparatus. But anyway, Bernard Watson there, they were doing research into those areas. In fact, they were doing research into biofeedback, into acupuncture, they were building the first early EEGs. So all that area they were into. So I contacted them, and basically he took me on to prepare for a PhD through the technician pathway of heart-lung technician. And my first placement was in the EEG department. But it was there that I came across work in biofeedback. Dr. Anne Mully-Hart that I worked with actually turned out to be the consultant for the National Federation of Spiritual Healers, which was, again, my area of things. So they used me a bit as a guinea pig. And because I saw fields, Bernard, it was interesting because I tended to see fields. I could see them around people. And
so you could see fields around people.
Not always, but sometimes, and I could see striations in them, patterns, effects. And it's like I was aware of the Earth's magnetic field and I could feel the shape of it. And this was just a feeling, but it wasn't scientific.
That's okay. This is an important part of all of this.
But the interesting thing was that when I doubted these things, I would be given evidence from the world, as it were. The field would help me to trust. So Bernard there, he was another Bernard. He was checking up how I was getting on in the department and everything, and he got me very comfortable. And then he suddenly said to me, "Liz, can you see my aura?" Which was
that's what I was going to ask.
We'd never discussed that.
Yeah.
And I knew that I might, and I said, "Well, I'll try." And as I sat there, I could see this light around him, a sort of hazy field. And he said, "Can you describe it to me?" And as I sat there, I got a bit frightened because it all started to bulge on one side. And I thought, oh my goodness, is he ill? What's this a sign of? And I didn't know, but I described what I was seeing, and he got very excited. And then after a bit, I said, well, what is this about? What's happening? And he said that he said this was amazing because it was confirmation. He'd been doing an exercise in which he would expect one side of the brain to be dominant and have much more electric, much greater amplitude of field. So that was really interesting to me. He confirmed that he was doing something which
you could see what he was doing, and so you could.
I didn't know what he was doing. Yes, yes.
You didn't know what he was doing. I was in a cacao ceremony in Denmark a couple of months ago, and I saw in the ceremony a spiral going up from the 11 people sitting around in a circle, a spiral going up through the ceiling. The person who was conducting the ceremony, Julie, was like, had been saying that there might be a spiral here, but she said it in Danish, so I didn't understand what she was talking about. She told me about that later, and she said, yes, there was a spiral going up and she saw it. So I was able to confirm for her what she thought was being produced there in the same way. And that's what we do for
third-party confirmation. It makes it objective rather than just a subjective. Now, you see, I remember around about this time, I had my young son into the house in his pram, and suddenly I saw descending on him, it was like a spirit body. It was all these spirals and things. And what struck me was like a witch doctor. It was these great tusks of light in the mouth region. And I kept looking away and thinking, am I just, is it a trick of the light? And coming back,
Yeah,
and it was
yeah,
still
yeah.
there, hovering. And slowly it sort of descended on him. And he began to stir and wake up and went in the house. And I put it aside. But a few weeks later, Dr. Anne, that I'd been working with, invited me to a talk at Friends Meeting House in London with Max Cade, who had developed with his friend Geoffrey Blundell the first version of the mind mirror for biofeedback. And she was a friend. He was an engineer, biologist friend. I think he was an MD of Anne. And she'd imagined he was giving a lecture on biofeedback and the mind mirror. And I turned up for it at the lecture theatre and went inside, but I realised I was an hour early. There was something else going on. And there was a big picture on the overhead. And again, I froze. I nearly jumped out because it was the picture of what I'd seen with great tusks in the mouth. And I looked at what it said. It was a clairvoyance perception of the astral body, drawing of the astral body.
So
I couldn't believe it. It was like, and
it was
if I'd been a few minutes later or afterwards, it wouldn't have been there. It
that's
was at
what one of
just the right time to see it.
that's what's one of those things I like about synchronicities is
The
showing up,
universe, yeah,
being at the right place at the
yeah,
right time, and by accident.
many things like that. And you think, gosh, the universe is teaching me, is trying to encourage me to be more numinous, to
Well,
trust.
we're not gonna talk about who the universe is.
No, no, no.
That's too hard.
There's a
We
larger
want
intelligence there.
we want to attribute it to something, and I'll tend to attribute it to you and your ability to know that you need to be there, that you have a psi ability that gets you where you need to be without
Largely.
a larger me. It's the same one that does the dream with the clocks. It's the same.
Collective human consciousness.
It's your, and I'm trying to suggest in all this that we have much more agency, whoever we are, but it's a
Yeah, yeah,
higher
yeah,
self that's involved with it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I I am trying to
Um,
get away from attributing it to some vague thing called the universe, which is almost the same as God, and it's
yeah, yeah,
almost
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
what's God? How does God intervene in here? And you can get into some confusing subjects. All I'm saying is that each of us, as you illustrate, has some agency, not all agency. It's not all you, but there is a part of the agency that is yours and that helps make it happen, that without you having contributed your agency, it wouldn't happen
Mm,
because there's
mm.
something else going
Yes,
on. Uh,
there's that.
I,
Yeah,
I
it
like the story.
intended me to
There's
find the
you
answers.
you had a question. What's this? And that's what part of it. It's like Chat GPT. You gotta the prompts are really important. The questions that you ask are really important. And you got to see your son astrally. You didn't know that before. So let's get to some slime mold stuff and the collective human organism,
Right.
please.
Anyway, so later when I found myself, I'd been as an undergraduate, I carried on doing projects when I could to do with the electromagnetic field interaction and using model systems, liposomes, which is just like cell membranes basically. And I couldn't believe when my supervisor actually said to me, "You should be doing a PhD. How about it?" And immediately my heart sank because I didn't think I would be able to do that as a mother and with children and everything. And I'd never, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I doubted that I'd be anyway. And and one of the reasons was being able to do it in that area because of the prejudice. I mean, when I was doing the project on the effect of magnetic field on chemical reaction. The chemist, the head of the department, chemistry, said, Liz, in all my years as a chemist, magnetic field has never affected the rate of chemical reaction, and it never will. And if you believe otherwise, you're prejudiced. I couldn't believe he'd said that. But that was not the, I had that all the way along. People didn't want to believe, they didn't want to go in that area because it's not in the curriculum. It's not. Anyway, so the thought that I might actually be able to do a PhD in this area was amazing. And I was obviously in the right place, because it so happened that one of the lecturers there was a biochemist in the pharmacy department. And he had recently, he knew that electrochemical reaction, it must be affected, that fields, it must interact, that body was electrochemistry. I mean, he was an electrochemist, basically. And so he was open to this research and agreed to supervise me, along with the head of biology, who was also a very open-minded person. So I was really lucky, because the prejudice, people had accused me of atavistic thinking, witchcraft and the Middle Ages, for these interests. Biology is flesh and blood, it's solid. Invisible fields cannot interact with flesh and blood. The solution.
No,
Well,
they
do
can't.
around that time, there was a program on television. I think it was a Horizon program called Heretic series. They mentioned people like Benveniste, heretic. It was an anti these things. And Rupert Sheldrake was one of the episodes was on Rupert Sheldrake's research. And the editor of Nature, that prestigious journal, Nature, in Britain, I think it must be worldwide, but very prestigious journal, he actually said that Sheldrake's books should be burned. They were corrupting the young generation of scientists. He actually said that Rupert Sheldrake's book, because he was suggesting morphic resonance, morphic fields, morphogenic fields, and this was an editor of a top science magazine. So this was what I doing what I was doing was up against. And it was right from the gut he spoke. It was with such venom. I couldn't believe it. A scientist, or somebody in charge of publishing scientists, had this. So, this was a field that you didn't get funding for. But anyway, I was able to do my PhD there. And I was looking for a system. Now, there was money, there was funding if you used rabbits, if you used animals, because at Barts, they'd been using what they called a bone box. They'd been doing research into fields to stimulate non-uniting bones. There are some cases where bones are finding it very hard to heal. And Becker and Bassett, Becker particularly, had done work on amphibian limb regeneration. So they knew that fields were very important in healing. And healing fields was my area, but that electromagnetic fields were very important in generating the right currents to support migration of cells and all the rest of it. And so the idea was that if you could find the right sort of signal, the right amplitude, the right level, the right pulse frequencies, that you could actually encourage these cells to heal. So this was a new area of research. I knew they developed that there. So this was a possibility, but I didn't want to work with animals as an animal model. I didn't like the idea of breaking their bones and things like that. So I looked for a cell system that would be easy to use, and that I could isolate and really look without too many interfering parameters, variables, that I could really investigate for this. And I discovered that the Imperial Cancer, there was research going on in Cambridge, Strangeways Laboratory, where they were looking at I think they were using models, they were using rabbits, but they were investigating a particular enzyme system that had been shown to interact with fields. It was the adenylate cyclase enzyme system, which secrete cyclic first and second messenger molecules like you get in slime molds. And they'd been showing that cell signaling, and the time constants, could be were affected. There were effects using these electromagnetic fields. And then I discovered that the Imperial Cancer Research Fund, that other scientists were using slime molds as a model cell system for investigating cancer, where cells have gone awry, cells that should be normal cells in the organism. Their timing is all wrong. They keep multiplying and they've gone out of sync. In other words, you've got a diseased part of the body like we have in the human collective.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the human collective.
It's a cancer in the human collective.
Again, cancer in the human collective. Yeah. And so anyway, I went and visited these places and I discovered, I sort of put it together. So I put forward the proposal for a project in which I would use this model cell system. And I would use the pulse magnetic fields that I used in bone healing to see whether I could see an effect, because it seemed that there were specificities in the signal. It wasn't just any old signal, that there were parameters of the field you were using. Timing was important, the frequency, the pulse rate, all these things, the amplitude. And there was a theory known as a cyclotron resonance theory, in which also the geomagnetic field was part of this. The research was very variable. It was not clear that there were effects that were seen, but they were variable. So it was a difficult area to research, because there were variables that you didn't understand in the environment. There were many things that what do you call it? I can't think of the right word, but confounders that they had to get rid of from the environment. So either you had to use a completely sealed space, a Faraday cage for your experiments. But you see, in bone healing, people aren't put in Faraday cages, and in the natural environment, the heart and everything else you're in. So being able to research, it was difficult. It wasn't an easy area to research, but a slime mold as a model cell system made it easier to look at this specific enzyme, adenylate cyclase, which is prominent in every organ of the body, almost every tissue, every system, in the endocrine system, in the brain, in the nervous system, vascular system, the heart. It's a signaling molecule that allows reactions to take place within the cell and from the outside. It connects the inside of the cell with the outside. So it's a telephone system, really, but it also regulates, and it's a wonderful enzyme to study. And in the process of so anyway, I was given the go ahead to do this, and it was difficult research, but it was fascinating, and I did find that it was the time constants, interesting. You see, time, this is where time comes in again.
Again, we're time, yeah.
It's time. It's that there are so many scales of time within the human organism. There are scales from the nanosecond up to the annual, the diurnal and the subminute, and there are so many different timings for processes in the body. And there's the very, very fast femtosecond, at the electronic level, there's such a range of timing. But what I did find was the association and dissociation constant of within this enzyme of its release of cyclic AMP, that this was that was interfered with, very subtle timing, and that the magnetic field, the geomagnetic field, also seemed to be implicated in this. And if you go into the mechanical systems parallels, you've got damping, second and third order systems where you've got timing of things. You have damping and you have amplification and resonance. You've got all these different ways in which systems interact with their timing to create amplitude. If you think of pendulums, you know, the way you can get pendulums working in synchrony suddenly and all, or you can get them all suddenly jangling out of phase, like the hands of clocks, going round this way and that way and other ways. Now, the interesting thing is that sometimes when I was engaged in this research, and there were times when the more you learn, the less you know, and I felt so totally ignorant. And I would go to Sussex University, and they had a roundhouse there, which was ecumenical. They had all the religions, but they had a big Bible. They had a private meditation room, beautiful stained glass windows with light coming through, and this big Bible. And I would go there sometimes and just sit, and I would open the Bible randomly. And one day I was feeling this, you know, real slump, and I opened it, and there it was. Behold, I am the most ignorant of men. I have not knowledge, nor have I wisdom. Can a man hold the wind in the palm of his hands or descend to the depth? And I felt, my God, this is resonant with what I'm thinking. And it made me feel so much better. It was a little synchrony, but there were other synchronies. So I would ask questions. Where is this leading? You know, why am I doing this research? Where is it actually leading? Because I was stuck with bones and physical systems. I knew what I was interested in was the hidden fields of the mind. Anyway, that night I had a dream, and in the dream, I was again with young people, and we were looking at a screen, TV screen, like a screen. And there were patterns on the screen, and we were making them change with our mind. We were changing those patterns. Well, again, minds interacting with the machine. But recently I've been studying neurofeedback, and it was a bit like with the bio, and that's exactly what you're doing. When you're looking at the traces on a screen, and they change. Anyway, shortly after that, there was a program which showed how a squid magnetometer was being used to monitor the brain non-invasively. And it was showing how, depending on people's thoughts, the way they were thinking, if it was an analytical problem or a analog sort of problem, they would change their pictures on the screen. It would show up. And this was in a very controlled environment with a sort of underground with Faraday cage and everything. And the squid magnetometer is a super cooled magnetometer. But my external supervisor at Southampton was a physicist, and he actually built one of these for a local group that was of acupuncturists to monitor fields around the body. I don't know what the outcome was, but I know they transferred it to Oxford or Cambridge, where it was used to monitor the fields around the body. But the squid magnetometer was, but anyway, this was my dream correlated, if you like, or echoed a program that I then saw on television about this squid magnetometer and about the way in which brain patterns could be monitored from the fields around the head.
Liz,
Sorry. Oh, all right. Sorry.
Liz.
Sorry.
So interesting hearing how much you know and what you've done.
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
we don't have that. We don't have forever here.
No. That's right. Stop me.
And there's two parts to what I'd like to talk about in the last part of our being able to talk with each other, about 15 minutes worth. Is the mind can influence physical reality, which suggests the mind and physical reality are part of the same field.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important idea. And I want to see if you can keep these subjects in mind for the next part of it, and how that is related to slime mold activity, and how then we might generalize both of those ideas to the optimal functioning of the collective human organism.
Right. Let me get there. Well, it's very interesting how Koestler, in his book, The Ghost in the Machine, and Pierre Tyler de Chardin and other people as well before have talked about the Janus-based reality of our existence as an individuated unit of consciousness, but also as a multiplicity, because we're much more than that. We're a collection of organisms. We're a common cell, a community. Even in our body, we think we're separate, but we're not at all. We're intimately connected with the environment around us, with the universe, and with each other. People think that nobody knows, what goes on in our head or a body, but that's not true. That's not true at all. And in many ways, research and more recent research where people have started to investigate the luminous field, we know that minds interact, telepathy and all sorts of things. I know that from my experience. And I knew that as a child. The dead are still with us. Those fields haven't disappeared, that people are still there. And I know that now from my training. But so in slime mold, this is the thing, Koestler has this very interesting way of describing how our physical world is hierarchical. Reality seems to be hierarchical, from the individual to a collective organism, if you like. And he takes it a bit like Tyler de Chardin to the noosphere, or the omega point of where we become a superconscious aware of itself. The human community becomes coherent, really, psychically, and at a higher level of evolution. And I think that is possible. It needs a change in the brain, which also affects a change in the heart. And the slime mold, and Koestler himself talks about that as a model system, his idea of hierarchies. The interesting thing about it, as an individual amoeba, it contains all the organelles like that we have in our cells. But as it's feeding on, as you've said, bacteria in the soil, when it becomes scarce, certain members, realizing this, begin to secrete in a pulsatile fashion this chemoattractant molecule. And a crazialis, they're known at, because it's almost like a pheromone, but it's it's a molecule that creates cyclic AMP, that creates a gradient. As it's secreted, they secrete it into the environment in a pulsatile fashion. So a pulse of it goes out. They become like pacemaker cells. So they're actually creating this environment, which is rhythmic, of this rhythmic secretion of this substance, which draws other amoebae towards it. And they begin to pile up as they come. They follow along this gradient. And it's very much in a timed fashion. There's timing. Until they form what is called a grex, or a slug. They call it a slug, a motile slug, which forms a sheath around it. So all these cells come together. You can watch them under the microscope as they begin to clear a Petri dish. And you see these areas of clearing. And at a certain point, when they recognize food is scarce, they go through this metamorphic process, which is mediated by electrochemical gradients, basically, from this cyclic AMP messenger molecule sent out via the adenyl cyclase enzyme system. It's a second messenger molecule here. And so the cells all come together and they move as a slug through a slime sheath they secrete. And at a certain point, they begin to differentiate. And this is, you could say, some field system innate in them knows where to go and how to do. Something else, it almost seems to operate them to become from a holon to a whole. So some of the cells become basal cells, some of them become stalk cells, and they change slightly, their internal structure according to what they're intended to do. And some of them form a fruiting body and become spore cells, which are very resistant to heat, cold, dryness, drought. And so this is where they're mycotozoa, they're known as the sort of mushroom side, as it were. So from being more animal, zoa, they become more like mushrooms or molds because of this spore fruiting body, which in time gets washed down into the environment, and the spores come out and become, again, when there's food on the ground, their time is right to again become amoeba. So it goes on, but some of the cells have sacrificed themselves in the meantime. And there's a question there. What sort of does an individual amoeba have a consciousness? And is the consciousness of the actual slug bigger? Is it a bigger form of consciousness? And we have that in the human community. You know, the whole on the individual has such an incredibly fixed sense of self. Children, very small children, don't have that. The world is still, they have to learn to differentiate. But that feeling of being in a body is like a trap. It can be, can lead to, because in truth, where does our boundary end? You know, those fields around us extend, and we must influence each other without touching through our fields. So where does, you know, it's an illusion in a sense. We're really quite empty. You know, what we call our physical body, solid flesh and matter, is largely space. So it's, you know, we're very illusory in our sense of self, the individual. And the realization of the actual interactiveness of the universe, we're full of time. You know, it's a miracle, what we call, you know, this illusion of physicality, if you like, but it's still, it is, whatever it is amazing that it works. All these systems, these clocks, these timing in us, these fields are all interacting, wheels within wheels. You know, they're interacting. We don't have to know anything about it or do anything about it. It just happens. But not only are they interacting in this, what we call our body, but they're interacting with the stars, with the fields around us, with the sun. They're interacting to an extent that we don't even begin to understand, with other signaling processes around us. And the geomagnetic field is one of those, because it's not just a DC field. It has micropulsations in it. And when I first started to observe those with sensitive equipment, I thought, that is a signaling system, which is very like what you get in the heart and other processes in the body. You know, if you do a frequency, a Fourier analysis of it, there are frequency bands, just like you got in the brain and in the heart. And we're interacting with those. And in the natural environment, we grew up with that. But we, in our ignorance, we've externalized everything, thinking that we're separate. We've created computers, we've created an environment which is producing fields which are interfering with us all the time, which are all around us. The radio waves, the computer I'm sitting in front of is giving out a field, and we don't really know. I mean, in recent years, the government has put money into research into mobile phone interaction. And in America, people were litigating because of brain cancers to do with mains frequency fields. And the sad thing is that in our individualism in society, the idea of acquiring things, wealth, that wasn't there in primitive cultures, not so much anyway, but in the natural man, I think living in close harmony with the environment and understanding the seasons is a different way to what we live now. We've isolated ourselves in cars, in bubbles, in houses that are electronically controlled, and with machines that we don't know to what extent they're interfering with our natural rhythms. Well, British research into mobile phone use, one secure finding that they had was that it interferes with our sleep, with our brainwave patterns during sleep. If you've been on the mobile phone before you sleep, and advising with children, definitely not to have it in the bedroom, So those are findings that they're interfering with brainwaves, and research has shown, but again, there is a resistance to that. There is a resistance to believe that, because people have externalized their numinous world now, and the world of talking and interaction, human speech, sound, to sound bites on a screen. And you even see little children screaming when it's taken away from them.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's frightening. And this is leading to ADHD, autism. It's epidemic in this country, and all sorts of things that you don't know. Did they have it to that extent in the past? I mean, we are an overcrowded planet. We definitely are. I mean, Britain is small, but it's overcrowded. And, we're multiplying without, and we don't understand our real interconnection with each other and with the environment around us. And we're poisoning ourselves. There is a cancer in the midst of the human collective. And I would say that cancer is in the consciousness field and the paradigm, which is fear-based and acquisition-based. And so you have a monopoly of cells, you could call those the ultra-rich, that are taking all the resources, and other parts of the human collective body are starving. They're creating environmental havoc because they want the oil, they want the riches, they want these things that are bringing in money, and they're thinking of taking humanity to other planets because they're ruining this one. It's crazy. It's a cancer. Cancers spread, don't they? They start
Yep.
proliferating. They send off offshoots. We're thinking of sending off secondaries to Mars. Can you believe it? Can you believe that the human collective is allowing this to happen, that it is so blind? But you see, we've been blind for years. I mean, one of Koestler's early books was The Sleepwalkers. And science is a period of sleepwalkers. I mean, it wasn't long ago that we thought it was Earth-centric, the universe. It's only recently that we accepted heliocentricity. And so we believe that we are, as individuals, so powerful, and well, we don't. I mean, we oscillate between thinking we're nothing and sort of having existential crisis, and thinking that we're all powerful and important and can rule the world, and keep taking. And it's not a holistic view. It's the view of a holon who has been corrupted, basically. It's like our blueprint, our original blueprint, something has gone wrong. And Koestler is very interesting when he talks about the speed with which the human cortex, the cerebral cortex, developed evolutionary. There's an explosion of brain matter, which we haven't learnt to use. The old animal brain, which kept us linked with the outside world, with the world of nature, with the world of the stars, the moon, the sun, the geomagnetic field, the seasons, each other, has that world shrunk to an illusory world that we've created, a technological world, which is pretty wonderful, but it's become cancerous. The nuclear power industry. I mean, nuclear power, it is inherent in nature, but how have we used it? Bombs, explosions, and for energy, which even the use of that energy, the storage of nuclear waste, can actually wipe out. I mean, look at Chernobyl.
Well, you've this this last part, what you're talking about is beautiful. How you've described what's going on here, and there's more I know you could say about what's wrong. Um, but we're come to the end of this discussion. But what I'm looking at is what we can do as slime molds, um, recognizing several things that you mentioned about the slime mold, which I didn't know, and it's part of the reason I wanted to talk with you. Is the that there are certain cells, certain amoebas in the slime of certain amoebas that become the agents, the activators, the leaders of of what to do, and that the slime that we got to do something, and that's organize, and then the cells somehow begin to differentiate. The spore cells, the ones that are walking on the ground, and the ones that are in between. So somehow they know to go into different places. And another important thing you said is some of the cells die in the process of organizing.
They
And
give up their individuality in the interest of the whole. But there's a very strange thing about that, because in a sense, if you know that the whole, that you are the whole, that at some level, at some other dimensional level in which we exist, that unfortunately we're so finely tuned to this particular reality that although we could tune out, and we are unaware of those for the most part. But if we were aware of those, we wouldn't be afraid. And if we had the experience which allowed us to enter those levels and recognize them, that we are in those levels, that we don't die, that
that we
us is a collective far greater than we think, we wouldn't be scared of losing that illusory individuality. And that is the circumcision of the heart, the opening of the heart chakra, which is very much in the spiritual literature, if you consider. And I mean, it's an amazing story, really. You know, the Jesus story, the love story, if you like. At this time in our humanity, it hasn't been taken properly. You think of all the wars that have been waged in the name of that. But the prophecy was circumcision of the heart. And that, when you look at the bleeding heart in churches, isn't that the symbol of the circumcision of the heart? I had a Jewish neighbor, and I asked him about this thing to do with circumcision of the male genitals. And he said, but this was a thing for identity, for tribal identity, very important in the individuation of people consciousness. But there is prophecy in the Bible and in our culture. And you take Tyler de Chardin, the noosphere or the omega point, where the heart and consciousness becomes elevated. So people love each other, love your neighbor as yourself, that there is harmony and love. And that's prophesied back in Exodus, the circumcision of the heart. And I hadn't realized the full symbolism of that, but it was when my daughter was 10 and she was unwell in bed, and I'd been reading the Bible to her. And because she was unwell, I then stopped reading, and I felt she needed to go to sleep. And I put my hands on her, which I used to do for healing, sometimes a massage and sometimes just healing. And I suddenly felt this presence over me, really powerful presence, a healing presence. I went all distant, and then I suddenly heard her little voice, "Mummy, Mummy, there's a golden man next to my bed." And I said, "Don't worry, I'm sure he's there to help you." And she said, "Mummy, I just put my hand out and it went right through him." And then she was psychic. She saw people that had died. And when I knew that what I was experiencing was a healing presence, and I carried on with the healing because it was still over me, and it was such a powerful presence. You know, I felt all this energy going through me. And then she said again, a little voice came, "Mummy, Mummy, he's here again, the golden man." And I said, "Don't be afraid. I'm sure he's just here. Ask him what he wants." And she said, "He said he's going to come again. He's here to help me." And, you know, for weeks afterwards, we joked about her golden man. And then she started to say, "Oh, I was just imagining it, Mummy." Because, and she would, when she got to be a teenager, she was 10 at the time, she blocked all those experiences. But I knew that she was very psychic. Now she's a psychotherapist herself, and she uses that, but she won't go into that area. She recognizes it. But the interesting thing was, I thought, why did I have that experience then? And why did she get that? And I looked back to what I was reading. Now, this is the interesting thing. I got to the point of Exodus where Moses has to hide himself as the presence of God passes by. And then they were talking about, and I will circumcise their hearts. And that's why I had the chat with my neighbor who was Jewish, because I wondered what that meant. And so it was him that helped me to understand what it might mean. And I thought, isn't that interesting?
Yes, that's interesting. That's more than interesting. Well, we need to be able to bring this wonderful discussion to an end, Liz, and I thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernie, for giving me the opportunity to share these things, because I feel that these things are meant to be shared. They're not, me as an individual is merely a medium for the larger field. And I do feel, and I knew as a teenager, the world is sick. And I said, when I had the interview with the chief education officer, because I didn't know what to study, and I knew I wanted to heal the world. And he said, have you thought of medicine? I did have a place to study medicine, but he said, whatever you do, don't go and get married. And I did, and had children. I didn't do medicine, but I've come to it for a different way. But it's that feeling, and I know that you have it too, of a
I
healing
do,
world. And I think,
and the healing has to be done collectively, and it has to be done, I think, by the analogy that you bring of some of the slime molds leading the way. Some of the amoebas in this make this slug have to lead the way. It's just the way it is, and they're
pacemaker.
pacemaker. Yeah, the pacemaker. Well, I'm gonna, we could keep talking, but for now, I'm going to say thank you very much, Liz, for
Thank you,
being with me
Bernie.
today.
It's a pleasure, and it's so good to be able to share. Yeah.